Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
So my name is Eisha. It's pronounced Eisha, although it may look like Eisha or Aisha, but it's pronounced Eisha Armstrong. Professionally, I am the co-founder and now executive chair of a company called Vecteris that's headquartered in Cincinnati, but we're completely remote. Cincinnati, Ohio, completely remote. And we help B2B services companies do what we call productize, which is how do you take a service and make it more scalable, standardized, usually using technology. And I've been doing that now for over 6 years. So it's been a fun ride. Have got a small but mighty team and a co-founder, which I highly recommend. We can talk more about that later, having a co-founder. And then personally, I'm a mom of 2 kids. My oldest is headed to college for first year next week.
Oh, wow.
So I'm a little distracted by that. Not going to lie. It's a big milestone.
Yeah.
I'm a certified yoga teacher. So we can talk about how that has helped me in my entrepreneurial professional journey. I like to climb mountains, both hike, and I did my first technical climb this summer,
What's
to
a
run.
climb?
So on glacier, so with crampons
wow.
and roped in and ice axe and all that kind of fun stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a bit about me. I spent, prior to founding Vecteris, I spent my career working for a company that was really the pioneer in productizing consulting services. And I was on the product development, management, leadership side.
The EW Scripts company? Is that one?
No, that's a media company that was kind of a quick stopover before I founded my company. This was Corporate Executive Board, or CEB, which is now owned by Gartner. So your listeners have probably heard of Gartner.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the intro. And what you're saying about, obviously mentioned loads of stuff there, which we'll get into. But the thing that stood out as a parent myself as well, just straight off the bat, so is this the first time any of your children have? How many? Sorry, you say 2?
2. This is my oldest, although she did go to boarding school for the last 2 years of high school. So we're somewhat used to not having her around.
Right. Yeah. But still nerve-wracking, right? They're going into it's a bit more of an adult world, college, isn't it? Where they're to fend for themselves a little bit more, right?
Totally. And she's going to be in New York City. So again, we live in Cincinnati, not New York City. So that's a big change. Mm-hmm. And she, like you said, she's an adult now. So I don't have access to all of her school systems. I can't log in to make sure she's doing everything she's supposed to. And it's a leap of faith, Greg.
Yeah, but that's on them, right? Now it's if you don't fulfill your responsibilities, the only person that it negatively affects is yourself, right? And that's the truth about being an adult.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you don't fulfill your role, then you're the only real main person that suffers as a result.
The great point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my children are still quite young. So do you view your eldest as an adult?
I don't think she's going to listen to this. No. I mean, I don't know how old your kids are, but I mean, mine are 18 and 16. I sometimes look at them, I'm like, you were just babies. How did you become? Yeah, a minute ago. Yeah. Because in my head, I'm still, in my late 20s. So,
Yeah.
It's just so bizarre. And, and the, she's still learning, right? So here's a funny story. She had to get a new passport, and she was going to travel with the new passport by herself. And I said, okay, where are you going to put the passport when you travel? Because I'm a little concerned you will lose it. She's not the most organized person.
Right.
Okay. And 2 days into her trip, she calls me. I lost my passport. And I was like, okay, well, sounds like a you problem. So mad. But I didn't yell at her because I want my kids to come to me when things go wrong,
Sure, yeah.
so I can help them problem solve. But I was just like, ah. But this is the only way they learn. It's through experience. I mean,
Yeah.
you could tell them over and over again, but until they experience it themselves, like they're not going to listen to you.
It's the same for us. It's the same for people as a whole. You just, yeah, it's the best. The only way we really learn is by making our own mistakes, which is why working as an advisor is so frustrating. Why working in consulting and stuff is so frustrating, right? Because it's like, you know, when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I get paid to be ignored for a living. You know, like and then people come to me with their leg, you know, their tail between their legs, and go, "Yeah, you were right."
Right.
Yeah. You know, I'm like, all right, will you listen to me now? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that point in time with my kids. You know, at the moment, it's I've got a 9-year-old, both the two sons, 9 and like 1.5. So.
Oh, okay. You've got a little. Oh, 9. That is such a fun age.
If you say so.
No, because they still listen to you. And
no, not this one.
No?
No,
okay.
No, unfortunately not. No, there are some behavioral issues there that we're working on and so on. So, but it would be nice if it was like that, you know. Because but the thing is as well, I think also COVID had a bit of a negative impact on because he literally started primary school as COVID hit.
Oh,
so
yeah.
They had a few months in and then it was out, and that was the first time where they formed their friendships. They learned the social skills needed on the playgrounds, like after nursery, and he missed like 2 years of that. So his whole group, his whole age range across the UK are still lacking some of that. And he already had a troubled start in life anyway. So, you know, but we'll figure it out. He'll be all right. He's got us, so hopefully he'll be okay. But anyway, enough about me. I want to hear a bit more about you. So, how do you pronounce the company name again? I've been trying to.
I mean, it's made up. So no, it's Vecteris. Vecteris, yes.
Vecteris.
But I mean,
put more of an American into it. Vecteris.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me more about Vecteris. So just explain to me sort of how was this conceptually put together? Obviously, this was something you mentioned you were already sort of doing partially in your career prior anyway. But then how did you come to put this together? And like you mentioned, you got a co-founder. So did you meet your co-founder before?
So she and I both worked at CEB, Corporate Executive Board.
Right.
And she also, which was headquartered in Washington, D.C., but she lives here in Cincinnati. And she no longer, but she used to live right up the street from me. Right. So we both worked for the same company, headquartered in D.C., but lived down the street from each other in Cincinnati. So we would go walking at lunch and, you know, complain now and then about how we might do things differently. Imagine what it might be like to be like the masters of our own destiny, and just like how much better it would be if we were business owners and entrepreneurs and in charge of everything.
Oh, how little you knew at the time.
I know, we were so naive, right? And then we noticed, and so the company got acquired by Gartner. And so I had already left and I was at Scripps, and she was thinking about leaving. And we noticed there was so much private equity money coming into the B2B services space, whether it was like kind of traditional professional services firms or information services or training companies. And their whole investment thesis around investing in these B2B services companies was to further productize what they were doing. And the people in charge of these companies didn't know how to do that. They were wired differently. They didn't have a product mindset. And so we thought, had this hypothesis that there was a business opportunity to go in and advise and help these services firms productize, especially the ones that were private equity owned. So we spent the summer of 2018 doing a bunch of interviews with CEOs, COOs of kind of this hypothesized target market. And what we found is we were absolutely right. That was definitely the investment thesis. They didn't have the skills needed. And usually at the end of the interview, they would say, "Hey, have you launched this company yet? Are you ready to help us?" Which is great, right? That's a buying sign. There's a buying request, right? So we knew we were onto something. Our very first client hired us before we even had the company name figured out. And she was like, "I can't go to my board and have them sign off on this statement of work that just says Newco as the vendor." So we were like, okay, let's try to come up with a name. And we have a story behind the name. It wasn't just that the URL was available, but we were thinking, okay, vector, that's, direction and momentum. And then Eris is the Greek goddess of chaos and discord. So we're like, we'll help give you direction through the chaos that comes with productization, right? So that's how we came up with the name, and the URL was available.
Which always helps. Yeah.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
So look, for those that don't understand productization, what does it mean?
Yeah. So it means to take a service that is usually customized and delivered by people and standardize it. And that could be, we're just going to standardize how we deliver the service, like by creating playbooks or technology tools. It could be that we're going to put our services more in packages that are priced based on value rather than time and materials. And that we call productized services, because they're still delivered by people. They're just more standardized. And when you standardize, you can, you're less key person dependent. So you could have more people deliver the service, and you can more easily control quality. You can also start to sell your services through a professional sales force versus an expert, a doer. So there are a lot of advantages to doing that. But it could also mean, productizing could also mean creating a real product, like a software product or a data product or a training product or anything, content product that doesn't require a person to deliver the value. So that's when we talk about productization, kind of a spectrum of productization, from productized services to more products. And what we find is that that's very attractive, because then you start to get into things like recurring revenue. The margins are much better. Absolutely. You're not key person dependent. You absolutely are selling through a professional sales force. But that's then a business model transformation. And what a lot of the firms that we're working with are doing is trying to sell products alongside services. So kind of either bundling them together or making them complementary. So let me come in and do an engagement with you. And then there's some type of maintenance product that helps you sustain the change, for example, or a data product that helps you kind of do the work that I was doing previously. So that's usually what we see, rather than a full business model transformation, is the creating products that can be sold alongside services.
That makes sense. So yeah, a lot of it's about that scalability, the replicability of offerings, essentially, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. So an analogy I like to use is, the face painters that sometimes show up at children's carnivals or parties or things like that.
I've done that myself before.
Oh, you have? I had no idea. Okay, so this is perfect.
Not like as a job, but like I just got roped into it. Like,
okay.
A friend, they'd be like, "You know how to paint? Come and do this," because the person hasn't shown up. I'm like, "All right, fine."
Yeah, great. So customized service would be a kid comes and sits down in the chair, and you say, "What do you want me to draw on your face?" And you'll draw whatever they ask for, right? So it's different from kid to kid. You're the one delivering it. That's a customized service. Productized service would be if you gave them a menu of like 8 different things they could have on their face. And you knew how, you were trained on how to do those 8 things really well, but they were limited. And then a product would be if there were just stickers they could put on their face. And then if you wanted recurring revenue, you could do like, face sticker of the month club or something like that, where they subscribe to getting a new face sticker each month. So that's kind of a way to illustrate the spectrum, or the like sometimes called a ladder of productization, that a services provider could go down.
I like that analogy. I'm probably going to steal that.
Great, please do.
The next client that I have, where I have to, because I do somewhat get involved in this area with some clients, so I might have to steal that and then maybe point them in your direction as well. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you mentioned as well a moment ago about how a lot of the founders you speak to or spoke to, especially early on, just didn't quite have the skill sets necessary to put it together. What do those skill sets look like, would you say? What is usually lacking there?
Yeah. So what makes someone a great professional services provider providing, customized services can actually really get in their way of providing a product. So one example is I'm the expert, right? So Eisha Armstrong is the expert in productization, and I'm selling to my network based on my expertise, my resume. It's all about me, the person, versus a product. It's not about me. It's about the product. And that's not only like a shift in mindset, but that can actually be like very threatening to someone
Mm,
who their entire professional career has been marked by them being the expert and building up that expertise. So that's a really unique. It's not really like a skill gap, but it's more just like a mindset gap
mm,
um, that has to be overcome. A skill gap that we see is this kind of test and learn, lean product methodology of putting something out there in the market quickly, getting market feedback, and then iterating on it.
mm.
You don't see that as much in professional services. I'm not paying my attorney to learn the law. I'm paying my attorney to already know the law. Like,
Mm.
I don't want her to be testing and learning on the legal advice that she's giving me.
Expectations from buyers are a lot higher, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this kind of the skill set of running experiments, creating hypotheses, running experiments, putting things out in the market, seeing how the market's responding, and then iterating your product roadmap is one that they just don't have at most services firms.
Mm.
Um, so it can be taught, but it usually doesn't exist. And then the other third one, which is a skill gap, is which can also be taught, is technology acumen. So most of the productization that we're working with, even if it's creating playbooks or internal tools to standardize how you're delivering your service, usually involves technology. And now it's involving a lot more generative AI. And you just may not have the digital acumen at the leadership team level to make the right choices on investments. And these things can be very expensive.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
So that usually requires bringing in outside skills, but also a commitment on the part of the entire leadership team to increase their digital acumen.
It's interesting because of the first point you made, especially about mindset. Like in some ways, that it flies in the face of what a lot of entrepreneurs told, especially service providers, about personal brand, right? There's always been a bit of a double-edged sword for me there about that idea, and I have this same issue from my own services that I provide as an advisor and mentor, which is, in order to get the name out there, you do have to sometimes lean into yourself as an individual and as a personality and so on. But you do end up falling into a bit of a trap potentially, which is that you cannot scale beyond yourself because
Right.
every customer expects to be speaking with you. Right?
Correct.
If I suddenly was to introduce a second person into some of my mentoring calls and be like, they're taking over from now on, I'd be like, no, that's not what I'm paying for. I'm paying to speak to you, right? So it's very difficult for. I can understand how that. Well, first of all, how ego can be a huge factor there, but also why it also just feels like it's contradicting what they've been told for the last 5, 10 years on places like LinkedIn, which are constantly talking about personal brand. So how do you like manage to rewire that in people's brains? I mean, presumably it can only work at a specific point in time, right? Someone needs to be pretty much at capacity to even entertain looking at this as a next step in their business journey, right?
Yeah. And then it's also, like I talked about, a lot of the organizations we work with are trying to sell products alongside services.
Right.
So it's letting the service delivery professionals know like their expertise and their work is still valued and there's still a place for it in the overall value proposition,
Right.
but
So it's
it's
not
not
to say
going to
you need
be.
to stop that.
Yeah,
It can run alongside it.
exactly. And we tried, Greg, very hard when we founded Vecteris to drink our own champagne,
Mm.
which is why we didn't call the firm like Armstrong and Merrill. Merrill's my co-founder's last name. Like we called it Vecteris so that we at some point could not be associated with the business.
Right.
and very early on started to identify where can we first package what we're delivering? How do we kind of codify that? We've now as of next month, we will have published 3 different books. And it's not just my name on the cover, but it's my colleagues' names on the cover of the books too. And then what we say with clients is that, look, all of our work is grounded in this intellectual property that was, originally generated by Eisha Armstrong, but we've all now been trained on it, this methodology that we use, this approach, and we continue to add to it. So it's not just about me and what's in my head.
Yeah, it's really interesting because this is an area, and I remember when we first spoke, this really got my brain whirring, because this is an area that's been hugely interesting for me for so many years now, especially when speaking to small business owners, beyond just like the corporate world, even, but like even on the high street. When you speak to small business owners, like I was heavily involved in hair health and beauty, for example, for a large part of my early sales career, selling SaaS to barbers, nail technicians, hairstylists, and so on. And what I was seeing more and more of was this issue where a lot of business owners, small business owners, were hitting a glass ceiling of growth, of financial freedom that they had dreamed of, because, to your point, they were so ingrained in their business that they were unable to step back and see what the opportunities were beyond themselves. And it's something as simple as, like you said, like offering, like that, to use that analogy of face painting, like a membership, like, and a lot of the time I was giving advice to people outside of my main job, to be like, if you're struggling, if you're down, why not do a blow dry membership? Why not, you know what I mean? Like there's a ton of other things to do that they'd never think of, because no one's ever told them. So I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's just, my point is just that I've been thinking about these things for a very long time, and it's really great to have the opportunity to talk about them. But it's also, I think, really important for business owners to hear, not just in the corporate space, but across the board. If anything,
right.
more so in brick and mortar businesses, actually, because I think this sort of stuff is actually more common knowledge in the corporate world, which is still terrifyingly not as much than it is in the brick and mortar high street world of businesses. Whether it's builders, bricklayers, hairdressers, painters and decorators, like, it's still a problem.
Yeah, totally. And Craig, there's nothing wrong with being a solopreneur, small business owner that doesn't scale beyond yourself. But if you're interested in growth, or you don't want the business to be key person dependent on you, you either have to train people and have guardrails to make sure that they can deliver at the same quality, which I would argue is a form of productization, when you start to kind of document how you do things and you put in place those guardrails, or you start to create products to augment what you're doing. And the great thing is that technology is such that it's at the price point, at least for small business owners, where they can do a lot of these things relatively inexpensively. So there's a lot of low code, no code software out there where you could put up a membership site with a paywall, for example. You can do larger marketing campaigns to a larger audience, things like that. You can distribute on a broader scale using e-commerce. So, and again, these are not new tools, but things that maybe weren't accessible a generation ago now are.
Absolutely. I would play devil's advocate a little bit on what you said there about how there's nothing wrong with just wanting to be a solopreneur and not growing. I would push back a little bit on that, in the sense, for a very small percentage maybe, but I think that if you have a family and you are self-employed or have your own business because you want to provide for your family, it's a little bit short-sighted, I think, to think that you're going to be able to do that forever. Like, the reality is that what's the average retirement age now? It's closer to 60, it's 65, getting close to 70. And to think that you're going to be able to be on your feet, especially in some of these roles which require you to be physically active, sometimes back-breaking work, and that you are on the front line all day, every day until you're 70, is incredibly short-sighted in terms of being able to secure a legacy for you and your family. And you know what I mean? Like, and
totally. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not to be mean and to sort of criticize people for not having thought of that. It's just to say, come on. Like, I mean, this is part of my brand as a no bullshit advisor, right? I get asked to give advice to all kinds of businesses now. It's not just in the enterprise corporate world, not just in software, it's everywhere now. And this is more and more often the topic that comes up. It's like, you built this business, great, but now where are you going to be in 10 years? You can't still
Mm-hmm.
be doing this. You'll be dead. Like you'll kill yourself.
Yeah.
So what can
Yeah.
we do to prevent that? But then on the flip side, though, and I'm curious what your opinion is on this. You mentioned what part of the ways that this is accomplished is through productizing and standardizing, so that you can bring in other team members to go and sell for you. One of the biggest complaints that I hear more often is I can't find the right people.
Mm-hmm.
What's your response to that generally? How is it really the case that you can't find the right people, or is there something else going on?
No, I mean, it's certainly everyone is going to have to be trained. So you are probably not going to find a unicorn. They don't exist. Who can do everything that you can do at the same level that you can do. But can you think about one, atomizing or breaking apart what you do into more discrete chunks where perhaps you can find someone who's really good at one part of what you do? And then you're going to have to make the investment in training them. They're not going to know overnight. Sometimes you get lucky and you're able to hire people who know more than you do and can do things better than you do, but that doesn't always happen.
That's rare.
So I think it's just, I don't want to say lowering your expectations, but it's being more practical. And one of the great things that I encourage, especially small businesses, say 10 and under employees, is you don't have to think of these as full-time employees that you're hiring. They could be part-time, they could be fractional, contract, because there is a labor force out there that perhaps is not interested in a full-time role, but could do marketing, for example, 10 hours a week really well for you. So it's let's say lowering your expectations a little bit, being prepared to invest in training, and then thinking a little bit more creatively about the labor pool that you're sourcing from.
That's a really good explanation for that, I think. Yeah. Very good. And tell me more about you mentioned that you're on the third book now. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
So tell me a bit more about these books. I'm just looking on the website here. I'll put the website in the comment section also, so people can have a look at these. But I presume it goes into quite a lot of detail of the stuff that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give a little commercial if you want.
Oh,
so
there we go. Look at
there's
that.
the first one. It's called Productize. The ultimate guide to turning professional services into scalable products.
Fantastic. I'd love to get a copy of that off you.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a link so your readers can get a free copy.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be like an ebook, and it goes through like the ladder I talked about. You can't see it here on the screen, but from customized services to productized services to products as a service.
Right.
And then we've organized it around what we call the 7 deadly sins of productization. So the mistakes that we see companies make, and then how to overcome those. So it's kind of, I think, a good kind of end-to-end. If you are interested in productization, what might that look like for you, and then how to do it well. And then the second book, this one was designed for larger organizations. It's called Fearless, How to Transform a Services Culture and Successfully Productize. So it focuses more on those mindset issues and how do you change your culture, because the cultural attributes that make you great as a business advisor, as a professional services provider, are going to really hinder your ability to productize. And then the third book, which I don't have a copy of yet, it's called Commercialize. So I'm not super original in my titles, but it's all about the go-to-market. So once you've created a product, how do you monetize it, price package, market it? How do you sell it so that you get a return on that investment that you made when you developed the product?
That's hugely interesting. I definitely have to try and find the time to read those. Yeah, and like you said, please do send me those links. I will put them in the description for people to check out. What was the? I mean, I think I know the answer to this, ironically, but what was the thought process behind creating these books? I mean, why a book? Why in this format? Why is that? You know what I mean?
So
Versus
COVID.
Any other time. Oh, COVID. Okay.
Yeah. So what happened?
These could have been a series of videos. It could be a course. It could be a number of different ways you could put that out to the world. Right?
Yeah. So I think one of it is it played to my strengths. So I like to write.
Okay.
Prior to COVID, I'd been doing a lot of content marketing and putting blogs up on LinkedIn like once a week. So it was pretty prolific. And then I had just engaged with a contract marketer and had signed a 1-year contract. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I don't know what happened to your business, but our business kind of came to a screeching halt for about 6 weeks. And then it went gangbusters. But there was a 6-week time period where we were sweating bullets. And I just engaged this marketer. We had this 1-year contract. I guess I could have canceled it, but I didn't want to do that to her. So I was like, okay, what are we going to do? Let's take all the blog posts and see if there's a book here. So that's what we did. And that became the first book, Productize. And it was so successful, it then kind of created momentum that like, oh, this is a really good thing for our business. It was a great way to, get our brand out there. It is a lead generation tool. So we have a lot of downloadable tools that people can get off their website, and that's how we get leads. So it ended up being very successful. And so it's like, okay, well, let's continue down this path.
Cool. And it's a creative outlet, I assume, right? It's something outside of the daily grind, a different area of focus, something to mix things up a bit for you, presumably.
Yeah. And it kind of forced our business to further scale. So if I was off writing books, I couldn't be doing client work or selling.
Right.
And so that meant we had to teach the rest of the team to do that or hire people to do that.
So what sort of scale is the business at the moment? How many are in your team?
There are 10 of us now. So like I said, small but mighty. And we have really, again, tried to drink our own champagne. So we go to market with a solution where it's packaged training, advisory, peer groups, and tools that's sold as an annual subscription. So not 100% scalable yet because it still involves people in the training and the advisory, but it is packaged and sold as a renewable product.
It's refreshing to see a company that's somewhat in the consulting sphere actually practice what they preach. Because I'll be honest, I'm the worst. I'm constantly giving advice that I know for a fact I do not follow.
Totally. I mean, why do you think I wrote the book Fearless? Okay, right? They say authors write the books they need themselves.
Right.
And for me, Greg, it was terrifying to sell perhaps to a client and then not be on the delivery side of it. Because I was like, oh my gosh, they think they're buying me. Hands. Like, what an inflated ego I have. Or to not even be involved in a sales conversation or negotiation. I mean, that is a leap of faith. And I had to put aside all of that fear. And I worked, not only did I write the book, but I worked with a coach and a therapist and all the things on like, what was the mindset issue that was getting in my way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's usually just the fear of disappointing someone, right? Letting someone down. That's usually the main thing. I don't think ego has as big a part to play as most people think it does. It's not so much that. It's more about, it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's being precious and wanting to make sure that the thing you built the reputation of that isn't smeared.
Totally.
Which comes down to the inability sometimes to trust others. Which often means you need to just take a look at yourself in terms of, well, how good am I at providing the resources and the support for my team? Because if I'm solid and I'm confident in that, then I should be confident in the results they're able to deliver. So usually solving one solves the other, right?
Yeah. So. And going back kind of full circle to where we started about parenting and parenting new adults.
Yeah, in some ways.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. Why do you do this work? What is it about this particular area that interests you enough to want to build a business around it? And I know that's kind of a big question, but what is it in your personal life, in your makeup, that makes this of all things the area?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that Nicole and I talked a lot about before founding the business. So before we decided what we're going to do, we decided why. And part of it was, we were in our early 40s. This was a good time in our career to take a risk. We'd built a decent professional network, had a strong strong resumes, but also had spouses who were working full time, enough money in the bank that we could take a financial risk of starting our own business. So it was good timing. And we were ready. I mean, I said it kind of tongue in cheek, but we sincerely meant it at the time, to be masters of our own destiny. We wanted to reap what we sowed and not have to answer to anybody else. We've never taken any outside money. The business is completely bootstrapped. And that's deliberate because we wanted to be in charge and most important, kind of create a culture and a work environment that we felt like we didn't have at the time. And we spent a lot of time, again, even before we named the company Vecteris, did all of those early interviews, thinking about our values and the type of culture that we wanted. And then we went to go figure out, okay, well, how are we going to get the money to build the company that has this culture? How is this company going to make money? So as passionate as I am about productization, I'm more passionate about maintaining this culture that Nicole and I have created with our firm.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, gosh, that's a really good question.
It's amazing how sometimes the questions that stump people are just to ask why.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know who else is going to listen to this, but I was sick and tired of having mediocre bosses. And I was sick and tired of working in cultures that I didn't think were super inclusive. And I was confident in my own abilities and felt like, Nicole always says this, if not now, when? That we just had to take that leap, take that risk and see what might happen, right? Because they say, like, you regret the things you don't do, not the things you did do. So it's really interesting. I mentioned the yoga teacher training. I know I'm kind of like all over the place, but
that's what this show should be called.
Yeah. So in 2017, when Nicole and I are having these conversations, and we're like, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to quit our jobs. We're going to start our own company. We're going to be in charge. I had also decided I'd been practicing yoga very regularly for about 10 years, something I did after I had my kids and was about to lose my brain. That I was going to take my yoga practice to the next level and become a certified yoga teacher. I didn't know if I'd actually teach yoga, but I wanted like that process of becoming certified and just taking my practice to the next level.
Like a challenge kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I thought the structure would help me. And it took me way outside my comfort zone, Greg. Like, I thought this was all going to be about learning poses and getting stronger. And instead, it was more of the kind of deeper spiritual work that happens sometimes around yoga. And I realized that, back to this book title, Fearless, I had been letting fear kind of dictate professional choices and personal choices that I'd been making. And that I was done with that. And that I was going to let myself, whether it was in the yoga studio, fall on my face while I'm trying to do a handstand, or fall on my face by quitting my big corporate job and launching a business, not knowing how it might turn out. Like, I was just like, I'm done.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
Being dictated by fear. And Nicole's, her dad had passed away. I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, unexpectedly, a few years before we started the company. And he was very young, unexpected. And she just felt like he had some regrets about things he hadn't done. And she didn't want to make the same mistake. So I think those things combined all just kind of gave us the motivation to take that risk.
It's interesting what you say about fear. I mean, fear is such an important part of our lives, and it's interesting how you term that, of like, almost wanting to eradicate it. Would it be fair to say that in some ways, and don't let me put words into your mouth if I've misunderstood, but would it be fair to say that in some ways it's less so about eradicating it and more about finding the appropriate ways to react to it or embrace it, or am I sort of mischaracterizing what the underlying sort of thing you were saying was a little bit there?
No, I think you're right. That nomenclature, fearless, we have debated round and round.
Right.
Because absence of fear, I mean, fear is a natural human instinct.
And it's important.
Yes, it can protect us.
Yeah. The absence of fear would otherwise lead to complacency. Right?
Yes.
If you don't have your guard up, then,
right.
If there are no barriers, then you will get raided. You know what I mean? Like, you need to protect your village.
Yes, but why I ultimately stood my ground and said, no, I want to title this book Fearless, not Courageize or something.
Right.
Right.
Productize the word courage.
Right. Like it's fearless.
Yeah.
Was because I think, this is not Eisha thinking, this is neuroscience, right? Human brains completely over-index on fear because of, we used to live in a time where there were tigers and people who would raid our villages and things like
into us biologically.
that doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, I launch a business and it fails, like whatever, I have to go get a job, like that's it, really.
I mean, that's terrifying.
Right, but it's like, it's not like my kid's gonna die, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There are a lot of safeguards in place.
Yes, and taking calculated risks and things like that. So I wanted to say fearless because I think, and I hear this so many times with clients, you probably do too, they raise all these risks and objections and, and I'm just like, come on, people, like you can manage risk. Like, how do you really think you're going to grow if you don't just put all of this aside and move forward? So it's really about putting that, what I call irrational fear, aside. Because yoga studio, right? I'm trying to get up, I'm trying to do a handstand. Worst case, I face plant. Okay, my face is only 3 inches from the ground. Right? And so then I let myself face plant over and over and over again. And guess what? I'm fine.
Right. It has to be balanced with what is the amount that you risk to lose, right? If the risk to loss, if the ratio is that what you risk to lose is really not as big as you think it might be, then taking that chance on whatever it is it becomes more and more of a no-brainer, right? I suppose once the risk goes up, and the risk is then losing an entire company and having to make a load of people redundant, right? Okay, it's no longer me. Now that there's a lot more at stake, so suddenly making bold swings, isn't as easy. Like, I understand that, so yeah, it's about calculating that risk, I suppose. But it's just interesting that you mentioned that, and like you said, that the name is fearless for those reasons, because it does play an enormous part of people's lives. But I think it's an incredible motivator too, right?
Yeah, and
in some ways, you could say that that fear has played a part in the sense that you're afraid to never find out what you're capable of.
Totally, yeah, right? Good point.
So
I like that.
It lives on the other end too, which is you're afraid to never meet your potential, to fulfill your potential. Like it's still there. It's just, taking own. That's why I was saying, is it maybe more about taking ownership of that fear, as opposed to letting it paralyze you and turn itself into anxiety, which, as we know, anxiety is the fear of things to come. Depression is the fear of things that have been, right? It's like finding some sort of balance somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I like that. No, I do think you're right. But I also think there are ways, so like I said, irrational fear I hear a lot of. And then there are ways to de-risk a lot of things that we're afraid of. And this gets back to that test and learn skill set that I don't see in a lot of services organizations.
Yeah, you see that a lot more in like tech spaces, right? Of iterating, testing and that. But yeah, you're right. We don't see that enough in services.
Yeah. So you can de-risk. I mean, it just breaks my heart when I have clients come to us and they've already written like a 7-figure check to a software development firm to create a software product that really only one client wanted. Yeah. I'm like, oh, you should have de-risked this. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the smaller end of the checks that I see sometimes too, and I'm sure you as well. It's terrifying sometimes, but Yeah, it's interesting. And I just, again, going back to my original question then, like, about productization and helping businesses productize, you mentioned that it's actually the culture that is the thing that really drives you, building the culture that you wish you had, I guess, being the boss that you wish you had. But yeah, my question was, why is that important to you? But yeah, why, why, why this? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I'm sure that your career has exposed you to a whole array of potential paths that you could have gone down.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it about working with businesses to help them develop this that is particularly interesting to you? Like, what about it gets you motivated to get out of bed in the morning? It could have been a whole range. You could have gone down a whole different route of consulting,
Right.
right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so what is it about this?
So
are there certain things in the way
yes.
that your brain is wired that this is just, it tickles the right places? Like, what is that?
These are such good questions. Oh my gosh, I love this. So when Nicole and I were doing the research, summer of 2018, we actually had 3 totally different business ideas.
Right.
And this was one of the 3. The other 2 kind of stinkers of ideas. And I won't even go into what they were.
I kind of want to hear them
now. No, they were so bad.
Oh.
But we were trying to find, it's like that icky guy, like, what is the nexus of what you're good at, what people will pay for, and then I forget what the third one is.
What does the market want or something like
That's, I think, what people will pay for.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a third one. This is embarrassing. I can't remember.
We're professional. We know.
Yeah. Oh. So it's where is there a gap in the marketplace?
Right.
So
right.
Yeah. So you've got some like white space, right? It's not red ocean. So that was kind of how we were making our decision. And certainly because we were both at corporate executive board, I was on the product side, she was on the go-to-market side. Like, we had a lot of expertise in this area. We also had a very strong professional network of people who were leaving corporate executive board and going into executive roles at these B2B services companies who are now private equity owned, and they were in budget holding positions and interested in hiring us to bring our skill set to their firm. So professional network, our own area of expertise, and there was a market need, and there was nobody else out there just focused on this niche. There are a lot of kind of innovation consulting or product management consulting, but at the time, nobody was trying to teach services native, non-tech native, non-product native companies how to do this. So we saw white space. Is that enough to get me out of bed in the morning? No. But it's enough to make me take the next step. And then as you get momentum and you're like, oh, we're really onto something. And then for me, like I said, I love writing, that kind of content development, thought leadership, that scratches something in me. And so I was like, okay, well, that's how I'm going to contribute. I'm going to start really creating thought pieces around this, codifying what we're learning, trying to become a thought leader in this space. And I think that, and the writing of the books, plus building the team, the culture, that's really what gets me out of bed in the morning. And, I think you're right. Like, you still want to deliver, you don't want to disappoint people. You still want to deliver a great product, but I feel like I'm in what my coach calls it, zone of genius right now, where I'm doing things that I'm really good at. And because Nicole and I are controlling the growth of the firm, I have a pretty good work-life balance, which you don't hear a lot with entrepreneurs of, companies as young as ours.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you mentioned about knowing what you're good at. I was on a podcast Wednesday talking about that as a guest, funny enough, which is rare for me. And I was talking a lot about I think one of the biggest mistakes a lot of founders make is not taking the time to really analyze what it is that they are good at and be as objective as possible about that. It's very difficult to do. Like, whenever you ask someone to describe themselves, they're usually way off the mark, right? As to actually, how we see ourselves and how others see us are 2 very different things. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to do and accomplish, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think it takes a very specific kind of individual to have put in the work psychologically to get to a place where they can be honest with what they are good and what they are not good at. But the advantages are huge, but especially when it comes to building a company, because if you won't know who to hire and what to bring in unless you get to that point. And by the sounds of it, a lot of the work you do is actually to help identify that, to your point about skills with others and mindset with others too, to help them build their businesses. So it's an interesting theme that I see come up time and time again. Knowing yourself has an enormous amount of advantages, not just in business, but in life as a whole, I feel.
Totally. And I want to be very honest. I did not do this work by myself. So right. the yoga absolutely helped. Then the teachers I had guiding me through that experience really helped me kind of overcome some initial fears. I mentioned I worked with a coach who's pushed me really, really hard to just stay in that zone of genius. And then also therapy, right? So there's like an army of people surrounding me just to help me.
We can't see what we look like without the help of a mirror, right? So
yes,
the same is true when we want to look at what's inside us, So yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is exactly why I recommend to people all the time any one of those flavors of self-reflective activities, whether that's hobbies that shine a light on and bring out sides of you didn't know were there, or like you said, therapy and coaching and mentoring. Great. That's not, you almost say that in a self-deprecating kind of way that takes off, that sort of passes the responsibility for the accomplishments onto them. But I think that's not the case. Like it comes onto you to take to decide to do that in the first place, right? So
and it's work
to you, right?
It is uncomfortable work.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't make the most out of any of those things unless you're prepared to sometimes face some pretty uncomfortable truths, or like you say, actually prepared to get your hands dirty. Like I could do yoga, get a mentor, and do therapy, but if I'm not engaged with any of those things, it's not going to mean anything.
True.
Right? So I'm interested as well. You mentioned before about one of them driving, one of the main motivators for you guys doing this was to build a culture that you didn't have before, because you just haven't had that, great experiences with bosses, let's just say. I'm sure you've had some, but you've had some bad ones, just to be diplomatic to anyone who might be listening.
Thank you.
But I'm curious, now that you are in a position of leadership yourself, has your perspective of them changed to any degree now that you're in, to some degree, their shoes? Do you have certain amounts of empathy maybe where it wasn't there before? And also, as kind of a double-barreled question, what's overall surprised you the most about building and leading a team?
Yeah, so I don't have a different opinion, in part because I was a business leader at companies I didn't own, right? So at publicly traded companies. So I was already used to having to be accountable for financial outcomes and building a team that could help me reach those financial outcomes. Had I not, I think this would have been very different, very different journey for me. So fortunately, I had that experience prior to becoming an entrepreneur. My co-founder didn't, and she's not here to talk for her, so I don't want to talk for her, but I suspect it's been a little bit harder for her and may have changed her opinion a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah. So no, it didn't change kind of my opinion of what those leaders were trying to do, because I already had I think a fairly realistic appreciation of what's needed when you're trying to lead as a human, but also reach financial goals.
Do you think that's something to do with the scale of the organizations and the teams as well? Does that have an effect, and the amount of pressure that it puts on the people at the top, or do you feel that it's inexcusable?
Really? Yeah, I think it's an excuse because I turned 50 next month, so I have enough experience. I've seen several different business cycles.
What are they putting in the water where you live, by the way, in the States? Like,
It's the
Seriously,
yoga, Greg.
it's the yoga. Is that what it is? I need to start doing yoga. I'm going to be hitting 40 soon, and I'm feeling it, man. Like seriously, but also like I keep seeing photos and meeting women, especially from the States. You all look like you're in your 30s, 20s, and you're telling me you're in your 50s and 60s. Like, what's going on?
It's the Zoom filters. Don't we have?
Exactly.
You haven't discovered the Zoom filters that just kind of soften.
I meet you in real life, and it's just like
right. You're like, oh yeah, yeah.
Like
Gotta turn on those Zoom filters.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what it must be.
Yeah. So I had seen enough business cycles, like been through downturns, had to lay people off, that I knew how to do that well, and I'd also knew how to not do that well.
Right.
Both because I'd made my own mistakes,
Sure.
Right? So I made a ton of management and leadership mistakes early in my career. Right. And I'd seen the way, again, I mentioned leading as a human. There's a way to lead through difficult business times that is empathetic and respectful.
100%.
And then there are ways not to do that. And I've seen both sides, and I've acted on both sides. So I had the gift of bringing that into launching our company, and we've been through a downturn. So, I mentioned COVID. We took off like gangbusters after that first 6 weeks, and like a lot of companies, we got over our ski tips and we hired too many people, and we had to do a restructuring last year, and that was very hard to do as a small business. And how do you do that and still maintain the culture that's so important to us? And thankfully, we were able to give decent severance packages. We have strong-ish unemployment benefits. Everyone that we separated from was an employee, so they were eligible for unemployment. It's not easy, but there's a way to do it in a way that's kind of keeps your integrity and keeps you human.
You've got to do what helps you sleep at night, right? Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And that's something that I noticed throughout my career. It sounds like we may have had very similar bosses in some situations, but I've also learned from some amazing bosses too, that it is possible and that you can do it. And I think what's interesting is in this game that we play, especially more in the corporate sphere, there's almost this sentiment that's been around for a long, long time, which is that it is quite dog eat dog, and that it is quite cutthroat, and that there's no room for that. That there's no room for that sort of empathetic, human-led approach, and I never bought into that. I never believed that, and I'm glad to see that that's shifting now, with a lot younger companies being built who are putting this at the very center of the way they operate. It doesn't always last, but at least it's there to begin with.
And I don't know. So I am part of an organization called Conscious Capitalism. I don't know if they have that in the UK.
Might do. I've not heard of it though.
It's fantastic, and it's capitalist business owners, business leaders who are trying to lead themselves and their organizations in a more conscious, whole person way. And it's been very, I'm fortunate that community is strong here in Cincinnati where I live. So I've been able to meet in person with some of the mentors and leaders in that organization, and get their advice and see how they've made very different and deliberate choices to align with their values. And I mean, it's part of the reason why Nicole and I, we decided last year when we were thinking about, okay, how are we going to continue to evolve this product at a time when our services business is declining and we've got all these, this massive payroll, like, should we take outside investment? We ultimately decided not to, because we felt like that would put us under pressure that would make it harder to stay aligned to our values. And so instead we restructured.
Sounds like a really cool, group there. But it's also interesting because I was under the impression that the word capitalism was a bit of a dirty word in the States right now. So it's good to hear that maybe that's being reclaimed a little bit.
It depends on who you talk to. Certainly my 18-year-old thinks it's a dirty word right now.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme. Youth seems to be a theme. I mean, it's funny, like I was talking to my mum about this the other day when she was last over, how, when I was younger, I was such a libertarian, right? And, they say that, you when you're young, you you're a socialist, and the older you get, you become a conservative, right? It's and it's so true. Like, I didn't believe it when I was younger, but my goodness, is it true?
Yeah.
But look, we've come to the end of part one. So for those that are listening or watching, the second part of this conversation will be out in a couple of days on a Wednesday. So tune in for the second part, where we'll be back to continue where we left off, really. So that's that. See you later, everyone who's listening.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.